He walked into his own dealership dressed like any regular customer, just to see how they treated people who didn't look like money. They laughed behind his back, brushed him off, and pointed him toward the used car lot. But then he made one phone call, and everything changed. The showroom smelled like polished leather and freshly brewed coffee. Soft jazz drifted from hidden ceiling speakers, blending with the quiet hum of low conversations and the sharp tap of expensive shoes on marble floors. Jonathan Reese stood near a sleek silver coupe, his hand gliding over the smooth lines of the car. He wasn't in a hurry. He had time, but none of the employees seemed to think he was worth any of theirs. A young salesman in a sharp navy blue suit glanced his way. His eyes scanned Jonathan's plain polo shirt and jeans, then dismissed him. With barely a flicker of interest, the salesman turned and made a beeline for a well-dressed couple stepping out of a luxury SUV. Jonathan let out a quiet breath, part amused, part resigned. He'd seen this kind of thing before, but the humor wore off quickly. Not a single employee had acknowledged him. Not a nod, not a hello. He leaned casually against the car and watched as a man in a tailored suit walked in, adjusting gold cufflinks on a crisp white shirt. Instantly, the staff snapped to attention. "Welcome, sir. What brings you in today? Our VIP showroom has some amazing options. Can we offer you a glass of champagne while we prep a test drive?" The man smiled and nodded as salespeople rushed over one another to help him. Jonathan crossed his arms. It wasn't the service that annoyed him. It was the double standard. He had been standing there for 30 minutes, just watching, just waiting. Finally, he walked up to the reception desk and offered a polite smile. "Excuse me." The receptionist, a woman in her late 20s with perfectly straight hair and a cold, professional tone, barely looked up. "Our sales team's tied up," she said flatly. "If you're just browsing, you can wait outside." "Outside?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. She didn't look up from her keyboard. "Yes, sir. We like to keep the showroom clear for serious buyers. If you're thinking about buying, we can set up an appointment." Her words weren't just cold. They were a judgment. Jonathan's hand gripped the edge of the desk. His patience was long, but even that had limits. Before he could respond, another salesman walked over. Older, graying hair, name tag reading Ron. He didn't smile. "Sir," he said firmly, "this dealership caters to a specific clientele." His eyes dropped to Jonathan's worn sneakers before meeting his gaze again. "Are you sure you're in the right place?" Jonathan met his eyes. "Are you?" Ron's jaw tightened, but he forced a polite, stiff smile. "You might be more comfortable at our pre-owned lot. We offer excellent financing, if that's a concern." The insult hung in the air. Jonathan didn't flinch. He could feel eyes on him now, but not out of interest. They want him out. He nodded slowly, as if weighing their words, then looked over at the suited customer sipping champagne while the salesman practically bowed at his feet. Jonathan sighed and pulled out his phone. He scrolled, found a contact, and hit call. It rang twice. "I need you here." "Now," he said. Then he hung up and slipped the phone back in his pocket. The staff had no idea who they had just pushed aside, but they were about to find out. Jonathan Reese wasn't always someone you could overlook. He grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio. He learned the value of hard work the way most kids in his neighborhood did, because he had no other choice. His mom pulled double shifts as a nurse, while his dad ran a small auto repair shop that barely stayed afloat. By the time he was 15, Jonathan was spending weekends under the hoods of old cars. That's where he learned how engines breathed, how transmissions carried weight, how a finely tuned machine could earn respect just by the way it idled. But it wasn't just cars he studied. He learned about perception, how people judge others before they even speak. His dad had a customer, Mr. Dawson, a wealthy businessman who always showed up in a spotless black Cadillac. People fawned over him, offering him the best seat, rushing to help, laughing a little too loudly at his jokes. Then one day, Mr. Dawson showed up in work clothes, driving a beat-up pickup because his Cadillac was in the shop. And just like that, nobody saw him the same. No one rushed to greet him. No one laughed. He wasn't Mr. Dawson anymore. He was just some guy. That moment stuck with Jonathan. By the time he was 25, he'd saved enough to open a small used car lot. He ran it with one simple rule: treat every customer the same, whether they're driving a Bentley or a Beater. People noticed. His business took off. By 30, he had locations in 3 states. By 42, he owned one of the most successful luxury auto chains in the country. And still, he never changed the way he dressed. He didn't flaunt his wealth, because for him, it was never about the money. It was about the principle, which is exactly why he was standing in one of his own showrooms, wearing jeans and a polo, being treated like he didn't belong. This wasn't the first time he'd done this. Jonathan made a habit of visiting his dealerships unannounced, always dressed like a regular customer. It was his way of keeping people honest. Anyone can roll out the red carpet for the boss. What mattered was how they acted when they thought no one important was watching. And right now, they were failing. As he stood near the reception desk, still being ignored, Jonathan thought about how easily people like him, people who didn't look the part, got dismissed. How many others had walked in and been treated like this? How many potential buyers had they lost because of shallow assumptions? He looked over at the man in the designer suit again, still getting VIP treatment, then back at the employees who had told him to wait outside. Jonathan had built his empire on respect, and in a few moments, he was going to remind them why that mattered. He stayed silent, letting the moment stretch. The staff had already made up their minds. He was just another browser wasting their time. But then, the showroom doors opened, and a man in a dark blue suit walked in, adjusting his gold cufflinks. The room shifted. 3 salesmen perked up immediately, their conversations dying mid-sentence as they turned toward the new arrival. "Good afternoon, sir. What brings you in today? We've just received a new shipment of imports. Could be exactly what you're looking for. Can we offer you a glass of champagne while we chat?" The man didn't say a word. He didn't have to. The staff had already decided he belonged. Nearby, a young salesman, barely in his 20s, glanced at Jonathan and muttered to a coworker, "You can always tell who's serious and who's just wasting time." Jonathan pretended not to hear. He strolled toward a sleek black convertible, stickered at $320,000, and reached for the door handle. That's when a sharp voice cut through the showroom. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you not to touch that." It was Ron, the older salesman from earlier, still with that same impatient tone. "These cars are kept showroom ready for serious buyers," Ron said firmly. "If you're just browsing, I can show you something more accessible." Jonathan raised an eyebrow. "Accessible?" Ron gave a strained smile. "Our pre-owned lots, just a few miles away. Lower monthly payments, easier financing." Jonathan said nothing. Not yet. Let the words hang in the air. They weren't suggestions. They were rejections. Jonathan looked once more toward the sharply dressed man, now lounging inside a brand-new car, fingers tracing the leather-wrapped steering wheel, smiling as a salesman rattled off features with the kind of energy only reserved for people they thought mattered. Then he turned back to Ron. "Let me get this straight," Jonathan said, voice calm, steady. "You haven't asked if I have an appointment. You haven't asked what I do. You haven't even asked if I'm here to buy. And yet, you've already decided I don't belong." Ron didn't blink. "Sir, we serve a very specific clientele. I'm sure you understand." Jonathan gave a slow smile. "Oh, I understand." Ron nodded, clearly believing the smile meant Jonathan was backing down. But he wasn't. Not even close. Jonathan reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and dialed. It rang twice. "I need you here," he said simply. "Now." Then he hung up. The staff had no idea what storm was heading their way, but it was coming. Jonathan tucked his phone away and stood still, his face unreadable. Around him, the employees went back to ignoring him, all their attention still on the man in the suit, now laughing as he took a glass of champagne from a salesman who looked like he'd just won the lottery. Ron, content with himself, turned and walked off. Jonathan exhaled slowly and glanced toward the entrance. And then, everything changed. A black Rolls-Royce Phantom glided up to the front doors. Its glossy finish reflected the sun like a mirror. Immaculate, untouchable, the kind of car that didn't show up unless someone very important was inside. The valet scrambled to open the rear door. Out stepped a tall man in a charcoal suit, sharp as a blade. He adjusted his cufflinks, scanned the room through the glass, then pushed open the showroom doors. The room fell silent. Salesman who'd spent the last hour ignoring Jonathan suddenly stood taller. Jackets got straightened, ties adjusted. Ron stiffened instantly. The man walked with purpose, each step echoing across the marble floor. Then his eyes locked onto Jonathan, and he smiled. Every head in the room turned. The man didn't walk toward the champagne-sipping customer in the designer suit. He walked straight to Jonathan. "Sir," he said, respectful, no hesitation. "Apologies for the delay." Jonathan gave a small nod like this was all routine. But for the staff, it was anything but. It looked like they'd seen a ghost. Ron stepped forward, nerves tightening his voice. I'm sorry," he stammered, addressing the man. "I don't believe we've met." The man turned to him, face composed. "David Langford, regional manager." His tone was cool but heavy with authority. "And I believe you're the one I'm here to see." The room shifted. Again, Ron went pale. Around him, the other employees froze, eyes darting between Jonathan and David, trying to make sense of what was happening. Jonathan let the silence press in. Then, finally, he spoke, quiet, clear, sharp. "So tell me," he said, his voice slow and deliberate. "This is how we treat people here?" The words landed like a punch to the gut. The sales staff scrambled, tripping over themselves with excuses. "Sir, please, it's not what it looks like. We didn't realize it was a misunderstanding." But there was no misunderstanding. They had judged a man by his clothes, his shoes, his silence. And now, the consequences had arrived. The polished showroom, once buzzing with confidence, was now heavy with unease. Ron's hands fidgeted at his sides, his voice caught in his throat. David Langford, regional manager, authority figure, and clearly someone who knew Jonathan, stood silently, letting the weight of the moment do its work. Even the receptionist, who hadn't bothered to look up before, was now staring like she was seeing Jonathan for the first time. Still, he didn't raise his voice, didn't explode. He just stood there, calm, quiet, watching them squirm. Then, in a voice like a blade drawn slow, he asked again, "This is how we treat people here?" Ron's mouth opened, but nothing came out. He looked at his co-workers. No one moved. As if waiting for someone to step in and save him, Ron glanced around desperately, but no one moved. David didn't either. He simply folded his hands in front of him, calm and quiet, watching the sales team like a school principal waiting for a confession. Ron stammered, forcing a shaky laugh. "Sir, I think there's been a misunderstanding." Jonathan raised an eyebrow. "Oh, a misunderstanding." Ron nodded quickly, grabbing at anything to justify himself. "Absolutely. You see, we cater to a very particular clientele. We just try to provide the best experience for." Jonathan cut him off with a low chuckle. "A particular clientele?" Ron paused, realizing too late that he'd just dug the hole deeper. The air in the showroom felt heavy. The spotless cars, the polished marble, the champagne, it all suddenly felt hollow under the weight of what was happening. Jonathan glanced over at the man still lounging in the luxury car, sipping champagne, still being treated like royalty. How much attention did that man get when he walked in? No one answered. Then Jonathan's gaze shifted back to Ron. "And how much did I get?" Ron squirmed, his face now flushed. "Look, sir, we didn't know who I was." Jonathan finished. Ron gave a small, defeated nod. Jonathan let the silence settle again. Then he turned to David. "Tell me, how much does this location bring in annually?" David responded without hesitation. "Roughly $28 million in sales." Jonathan looked back at the employees. "28 million, he repeated. "And yet some of you think it's your place to decide who is and isn't worth your time." Not a word, not a breath. Jonathan stepped closer to Ron, not aggressive but in full control. Ron shrank under the weight of it. "What if," Jonathan said slowly, "I really had just been a regular customer? What if I came in today ready to drop $500,000? Would you have let that money walk out the door?" Ron didn't answer. He didn't need to. The answer was obvious. The damage was done. And now came the consequences. The silence inside the dealership was suffocating. Every employee stood frozen, dreading what would happen next. Ron looked hollow. The rest looked like statues. Jonathan shook his head slowly, disappointment in every motion. Then David stepped in, voice crisp, no emotion. Mr. Reese, how would you like to proceed? Ron's eyes widened. He jerked his head up. And Mr. Reese? It hit him then. There was no more hiding. No saving face. The man he had dismissed, ignored, and sent to the pre-owned lot was the owner. Jonathan looked at each person in the room, steady and quiet. Then he said, voice low but clear, I want names. David didn't miss a beat. I already have them. The weight of those words swept through the room like a tidal wave. The receptionist's hands clenched at her sides. The young salesman who had whispered about serious buyers looked like the ground might swallow him whole. And Ron, he shook his head in disbelief. Sir, please, he said, taking a shaky step forward. We made a mistake. We were just trying to keep things running smoothly. Jonathan raised a hand. Ron stopped immediately. I've been in this business nearly 20 years, Jonathan said, voice level but powerful. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Respect doesn't cost a damn thing. The words hit hard. He continued, still calm, still composed. You looked at me and made a decision. You assumed I didn't belong here. You assumed I couldn't afford anything on this floor. And you treated me like I didn't matter. He let the silence linger again. And if you did that to me, he said finally, I can only imagine how many actual customers you've treated the same way. No one had a rebuttal. There was no defense. Because he was right. David turned to the stunned staff, face stone cold. Effective immediately, he said, everyone involved in today's incident is terminated. It was a gut punch. Ron's mouth dropped open. Wait, you can't. This is not up for discussion, David said flatly. And just like that, the room went dead silent again. David stepped in, voice firm and final. We don't run our business like this. The young salesman instinctively stepped back, as if he could somehow escape the weight of the moment. The receptionist looked on the verge of tears, her composure unraveling fast. Ron tried one last time, desperation leaking from every word. Please, this was just a misunderstanding. We didn't mean what? Jonathan asked, his expression unreadable. Didn't mean to get caught? Ron had no reply. Jonathan exhaled, rubbing his hand along his jaw. He'd seen enough. He turned to David. Make sure the rest of the team gets a company-wide memo. David nodded. Absolutely. Jonathan took one last glance around the showroom. A final look at the people who had sized him up, made their judgments, and written him off without a second thought. Then, in a voice so calm it cut deeper than shouting, he said, this was never about the money. He let the words settle. It's about respect. And with that, he turned and walked toward the exit. Behind him, silence fell like a hammer. The weight of their failure settled across the room. For those left standing, the lesson had landed, and it landed hard. Outside, the warm afternoon air hit Jonathan as he adjusted the cuff of his sleeve. Whatever had happened inside wasn't his to carry. That burden belonged to them now. Through the glass, he could still see the chaos unfolding. Ron looked frozen in place, mouth slightly open, unable to process what just happened. The young salesman leaned against the counter, pale and still. The receptionist had turned away, hand over her mouth, hiding her face. And David? He was already dialing numbers, making sure every word Jonathan said was followed to the letter. A valet hustled over, stopping in his tracks when he recognized who he was speaking to. Sir, can I get your car for you? Jonathan turned toward him. Unlike the others, this kid hadn't judged him. He'd done his job. Simple, respectful, professional. Jonathan reached into his pocket and pulled out a $100 bill. You handled yourself well today. The valet hesitated, eyes flicking nervously toward the dealership. Thank you, sir. I treat everyone the same. Jonathan smiled faintly. That's exactly why you'll go far. The valet gave a quick nod and stepped back just as a black Mercedes-Maybach S680 glided up to the curb. The driver, a man in his 50s wearing a sharp navy suit, stepped out and opened the rear door. Mr. Reese, he said with a respectful nod. Jonathan slid into the back seat. The plush leather conformed around him as the door closed. Through the tinted glass, he took one final look at the dealership, at the faces inside, panic settling in as the reality of their actions hit full force. Some lessons come easy. Others cost more. The Maybach eased into the street, blending smoothly into the traffic. Jonathan leaned back, exhaling slowly through his nose. This wasn't about revenge. It never was. It was about setting a standard. Because if people only show respect when they think you're wealthy, then they don't respect people at all. And in his business, that mindset had no place. Respect isn't something you reserve for the people you think matter. It's something you offer to everyone. Because in the end, you never know who you're really talking to. If you believe in treating people with fairness, no matter who they are, drop a comment below. Have you ever experienced something like this? Share your story. Let's keep this conversation going. And if you want more real stories like this, hit that subscribe button. Because the best lessons, they come from moments just like this.